Skipping ahead past the Parsi, which I have already done, the Viking Portable Library World Bible, edited by Robert O. Ballou, the Jew and the Christian, which, big surprise, is the largest section of this book. Like, people that have Bibles on their shelves, but when this book was written, the guy at the conference, Robert O. Ballou, was in a conference, and the guy is all like, some preacher stood up and said that, well, there's not really anything that compares to some other stuff some stuff in the Bible and that sort of thing. And someone else said, this guy's just not that read. And surely, indeed, in the scripture of this age, we have everything and more in terms of teaching of how to live life and good that's brought up. And also we have in more ancient scriptures, are parallel stuff that was going on at the same time as the Israelites, before the diaspora. Anyways, the Jew and the Christian. Out of the land of Egypt, out of a swamp of bulrushes, out of the loins of a slave woman, 1,200 years before the birth of Christ, came the child who was to become the supreme lawmaker of all time. The religion of Judaism, for which he laid the foundation, and that of Christianity, was that child, are today the strong bases of Western religious culture. There is no story of the miraculous conception or the birth of Moses, such as those which record the origins of Jesus, of Gautama Buddha, and of Zarathustra. Historically, there wasn't even a tribe of Israel the Israelites weren't even a historical entity for a few hundred years. Nothing survives for the first 200-300 years of them even existing, as after Moses. And supposedly they Yaqub was known in Egypt, but the Israelites as such, they weren't ever mentioned as a figure. There were no voices of angels singing to herald the coming of the great Hebrew leader, no moving star or other phenomenon of nature to lead shepherds and wise men to the bed of the child, no bending down of trees over the mother, as in the story of the birth of the Buddha, no luminosity about the place of accouchement, such as that we are told shown about Zarathustra's birthplace 3 days before his birth. There were no prophets either at his birth or during his childhood to proclaim his divinity, nor did Moses ever claim for himself any divine qualities which set him apart from other mortals. The greatest of all the leaders of the Jews was a child of his people, hidden at birth in the bulrushes on the bank of an Egyptian river by his mother in order that he might escape the edict of Pharaoh that every child of the Hebrews should be killed. And though we are told that he latter saw God, talked with him, and received directly from the omnipotent hand the stone tablets containing the 10 Commandments, well, sometimes it was 8, sometimes it was 9, sometimes it was 11, 13, 12, 10 was 9. I think 9 may be the number between 8 and 13 that is omitted from the historical record. But anyways, he remained a man of his people to the day of his death and beyond. From time immemorial, the Jews have prophesied the coming of a Messiah. Christians believed that the prophecy was fulfilled in the birth of Jesus. Now, among the Jews prior, they believed that there had been and will be a number of messiahs. So this single Messiah idea is not really, but that idea was emerging, and they turned it into a concept of the incarnation of God. Paul did. The Orthodox Jews' dissension from this belief does not arise from protestation that Moses was this long-heralded Messiah. again, there weren't Jews at this time. The Jews were a later group. But the Aparu did exist since about 1800 BCE, or maybe even before. They still await a divine leader in human form. Yeah, again, a divinely appointed leader, yes. And are content to regard one of the world's most dramatic stories, that of the life of Moses, as a narrative of a natural phenomenon, and Moses as a thoroughly human being. They are satisfied to say, in the words of Deuteronomy, there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Wait, that can't possibly be the words of Moses. If it was revealed to Moses, it would have been in like the form of a prophecy, not like that. Yet, if a religion which is swayed by so many cross currents and has so many leaders in it, as had Judaism, may be said to have a personal founder, surely that man is Moses. Now, the Israelites, according to Islamic narrations, had 1,000 prophets. The ancient Israelites themselves recorded 83 names. That I know of. With Aaron, Harun, as his lieutenant, he led the children of Israel out of their bondage in Egypt, and during 40 years of wandering, held them together, strengthened them in their heartbreaking discouragements, instructed them, laid down laws for them, which he enforced with an iron hand, and gave them the 10 Commandments, in the form recognized today by both Jew and Christian, by pleading, demonstration, threats, denunciations, and even ruthless slaughter of the recalcitrant. He induced them to worship only Jehovah, and thus paving the way for the monotheism which is the basis of Western theology. To understand the complex pattern of the Jewish religion, it is necessary to look back to times prior to the birth of Moses, to a time probably before the Iranian branch of the Indo-Europeans migrated to Persia. Now, remember, there probably has never been such a thing as Judaism as in one religion. The Jews were then a group of Semitic tribes wandering on the Arabian desert and slowly drifting towards what would later be called Palestine, constantly seeking better pastures for their herds and sheep and goats. And nowadays, the Jews are pretty much not a Semitic people whatsoever. Genetic tests show 90 to 95% of them have no significant Semitic ancestry. I'm talking about going back a few thousand years. They don't stand out versus any other people. 90 to 95% of them. Now, there has been studies that have indicated more, but I'm going to say 90 to 95% would be a more accurate reading, or more likely. There's evidence that even at this early date, they recognized a code of laws enunciated in 10 sentences, which they called the 10 Commandments. Some of these are identical in meaning with edicts of the 10 Commandments, of the 10 Commands, the edicts of the 10 Commandments. Some are not, while they are undoubtedly the parent of the latter code. See Bible of the World, page 1368. Now, the earliest editions of Bible of the World, even though they didn't reprint like the World Bible, the Viking Portable Library's World Bible, they're worth about a few times. One of these from the 40s is worth a few times as much as one of the others from what year? Yeah, 1939. The 1939 World Bible is only worth a couple $100, but a 1944 World Bible is close to $700. You're not going to find it for sale. At least I didn't find it for sale when I looked to see what it was. The stories of the origins of the earth and of man may already have been established, much as we have them today in Genesis. The story of Adam and Eve in its essential may or may not have some relation to a basic legend believed by that other great race of religious men, the Indo-Europeans, who told the story of Mashya and Mashoy in Persian, and Yama and Yami in India. The story, the flood, and the ark which Noah built appears in its essential details in the earlier Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh. See Bible of the World, 1366, 1367. Some of the laws enunciated in the Old Testament, notably those of exact retaliation, are from the Code of Hammurabi. Hatnurapi would be how that's said in the original language. A Babylonian king who ruled about 2250 BCE, who's probably identical with King Amraphel of Genesis 14:1. According to the Babylonian story, this code, inscribed on tablets, was given to Hammurabi, Hatnurapi is his real name, by the sun god himself, the sun bull. An almost exact parallel to the story of Jehovah giving Moses the 10 Commandments. Now, I have a text, it is obviously a print with the translation and that sort of thing, that says, I accept your political authority, but I don't worship the sun bull. We worship the moon bull over here, so, I don't know how serious that could be a joke. I don't know. Obviously, then, Judaism owes much to earlier religions, but it has contributed to the present. It has contributed to the present much more than it has borrowed from the past. Well, Judaism was a compilation of what came through the prophets and what was going on in the region. And you had, it took hundreds of years before they could, work together a Bible, and there weren't supposed to be edits for the past couple thousand years, but you have 3 distinct versions after this. The Soferim decided, this is the number of rows, this is the number of columns, this is the number of letters, and you have Ashkenazi version, you have a Sephardic version, and you have an Asiatic version. That contribution began even before the birth of Moses, about 2000 BCE, closer to the period of Zarathustra. The Jews wandered from Ur of the Chaldees westward to find a nation. Because in their migration they crossed the Euphrates River. They were called Hebrews, from a word which means to cross over. Actually, aparu doesn't really mean crossover, but it sort of like desert people, more or less. But wanderers, desert wanderers, I don't know. It's like a northern Semitic version of Hebrew, is a northern Semitic version of the term Bedouin. Genesis tells us that they were led by the patriarch Abraham. Some scholars now question the existence of the individual man Abraham, believing rather this was the designation of a tribe, but the name stands in Jewish belief for one of the greatest of all the early patriarchs, the first of the strong Jewish leaders whose name has been preserved, the father of the faithful and the friend of God. At the time of Abraham, his people believed in many gods. These gods have been given names after first having been worshipped merely as natural phenomena or objects. The Hebrews accorded their worship to individual deities as their fancies or their beliefs in relative godly strengths dictated. But the God of Abraham was Yahweh. Yahweh, the strong. Yahweh, whose power, so Abraham said, was far greater than that of combined strength of all the other gods. Abraham and Yahweh made a compact wherewith the great God had agreed to accept the Hebrews and as his chosen people, to take a special interest in them, and to further their well-being so long as they acknowledged him alone as their God, gave no homage to other gods, as did his will. Now Yahweh is initially thought as a tribal deity among the southern Semites, or the Arabs as we call them. Well, the Arabs really is another term for everybody because it's mixed people. So it's probably a more appropriate term for the race now. But it comes from Egyptian terms like Yaheh and Yahweh. So different variations of the lunar aspect and the solar aspect. The cyclical, the eternal, and linear all into one. Yahweh is God as a noun and as a verb and as a noun. Not just a deity, a formula. Now the doing of his will was a complex matter. Sacrifices, burnt offerings heaped upon an altar, prayer and incantations, these he wanted, but they were not in themselves enough. The will of Yahweh was that the people of Abraham should, in their daily lives, follow a course of conduct which had in view the well-being and happiness of their fellow tribesmen. Thus an ethical pattern was woven into the religion along with its rites and ceremonies. It did not yet include the concept of world brotherhood. Ethical conduct towards members of the tribe of Abraham was one thing. That to others was another. And even here was the beginning of an ethical code, which latter was to dominate the Western world. Abraham's compact with Yahweh did not constitute the monotheism, the belief that there was one God only, which Judaism and its child Christianity accept today, but was rather henotheism, the worship of one God while recognizing others. Now, again, this seeped in the idea, yeah, other people treat things as gods, but that's a little bit different than henotheism. But was Abraham a Jew or a Christian? No, these things came much later. Was Moses and any of the other prophets a Jew or a Christian? No. If anything, these were the path of the Ha-Kohanim, the enemies that we hear about in the so-called Old Testament. And if you look at even what the Bible says, you're going to see a difference. I'm going to make a video pretty soon about the difference between Jesus as a New Testament figure and Paul as a New Testament figure in a particular issue. Yes. What would Jesus do about September 11th? I'm going to make that one. Until long after the death of Moses, the existence of other gods was believed in by the Jews. The first commandment did not say, "Thou shalt not believe that there are no other gods but me," but rather, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." well, not regarding something as a god, not treating it as something that you can think. If you're going to think something is a god and refuse to worship it, you're still having another god. So this is a translation issue. But rather, thou shalt have no other gods before me. This tacit recognition of the existence of other gods was reinforced by such admonitions as revile not the gods. When God appeared to Moses in the burning bush, he did not say, I am the only God. Nor did he apparently feel that the simple words, I am God, were enough to make him known. He identified himself among the gods by saying, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Even years later, when Moses' leadership had ended with his death and Joshua, having led his people through a long lifetime, was about to die, he urged them to put away the strange gods which are among you, and incline your hearts unto the Lord God of Israel. A lot of the language is rather ambiguous in the so-called Old Testament, so it's not as a precise language as one might think, even though there's a lot more meaning than any of the Bible translations that I have even seen in some passages. So if you don't have an understanding of language, either the beauty is lost or some of the meaning's lost. And some things, it's like, there's not really a word for anger. The nostrils flare. So instead of saying God got angry or this person got angry, that's what they're saying happened. But that can mean something. Anyways. Directly descended from Abraham through his son Isaac was Jacob, twin brother of Esau. Jacob, whose name later became Israel, who was the father of 12 sons, became the head of 12 tribes of Israel. Esau, meanwhile, headed another tribe near Canaan, which became known as the Edomites. The story of the 12 sons of Jacob. How one of them, Joseph, was sold by his brothers and carried into Egypt. How Joseph rose to leadership under the powerful Pharaoh, and how he brought up his people to live there in a land of plenty. How he and his master died, and how another Pharaoh enslaved the Hebrews, is told in the latter part of Genesis and the first part of Exodus. Sorry about my foot squeaking the thing there. But the story of Joseph is one of those things that bibliomancy is, okay, fine, you're going to randomly look at something and, so you don't have a choice. But you flip open the page and let us kill our brother Joseph. If you have a brother named Joseph, instantly that's really bad advice. Or Judas went and hanged himself. Go thou and do likewise. You. But I'm sure people have killed themselves and others because of this, Be careful with your oracles. Thank you very much. Saying the people is told life. Then rose the mighty figure of Moses, grandson of a Hebrew slave named Levi, who was adopted by the daughter of Pharaoh when she found him hidden in the bulrushes. As a son of the royal household, he may have cast his lot in with the Egyptian overlords, but the Pharaoh's daughter had engaged Moses, his own mother, who had thrust herself forward through subterfuge to nurse him, and from her must have been well schooled in the matter of his birth and the history of his people. When, as a young man, he saw the burdens laid upon the Hebrews, he was overcome with sadness. This rapidly grew into anger and drove Moses to kill an Egyptian who was beating a Jew. Escaping from the wrath of Pharaoh, he went into the land of Midian, where he married and had the first of several encounters with Yahweh, who, speaking from the midst of a burning bush, said that his name was I Am. Just as in the later Hinduist Upanishads, Yama tells Nachiketas that God can be named only by the words, He is. Reaffirming the ancient covenant with Abraham, Yahweh said that he had come to strengthen his people. With Moses acting as his spokesman and executive, he would lead them out of their capacity. Omnual doesn't mean God is with us. It means the people dwelling of God, not God. It's not an incarnation of God, because then you'd have all new, instead of Noel. Noel, no. Isn't El God, mean God? Anyways, misunderstandings, right? How Moses courageously faced the Pharaoh, demanding and finally accomplishing the release of the Hebrews with the help of I Am, and the plagues he sent upon the Egyptians, and how he led them across the Red Sea to the very edge of the Promised Land, with the fire by night and the cloud by day which Yahweh sent to guide them, is told the magnificent story of Exodus. This story is of primary importance in the belief of devout Jews to this day, for they have not forgotten Yahweh's Yahweh's ancient covenant with Abraham, and God's help in their deliverance from Egypt is one of the basic evidences that he fulfilled his part of that compact. And to this day, among the Jews, both secular and some degree of religious, there's a lot of hate for the Semites, particularly of the Egyptian variety. And yes, it is appropriate to call the Egyptians Semites. Now the Arab race kind of extends towards, you got the Persians on one side, and then the Arabs also extend clear over to the other side of Africa on the north. I mean, in racial terms, this is what you have. In terms of language, yeah, too, the Persians went up into Afghanistan and all that, and once you get towards Iraq, then it's not so much Persians anymore as Arabs. But there's a lot of hate for these brown-skinned people with black woolly hair among Jews. Now, they're not all like that, but it's like, what happened among the Egyptians 1500-something BCE? Totally different. That has nothing to do with what's going on today. There's a lot of things that secular Jews are doing, or hypocritical ones, that, are we going to go think badly about all the Jewish people because of some bad apples? No. You got to judge people on an individual basis. After the death of Moses, the Hebrew people passed through centuries of vicissitudes as a nation. These are important from a religious point of view only insofar as the changing circumstances influence their religious and therefore their ethical concepts. These two forces, which as early as Abraham were becoming strongly enmeshed with tribal feeling, that the three were to become one, their attitude towards God, their attitude towards themselves as a united and exclusive people, and their standards of ethical conduct merged in the one mighty phenomenon of Judaism. One phenomenon? Again, there's a bunch of Judaisms. Some of them are monotheist, some of them are monotheistic, some are polytheist, some are Satanist, and of course now we have the emergence of secular Judaism. For nearly a century, in the time of the kings, they enjoyed prosperity and peace. Then, during the reign of Rehoboam, when the nation was in the throes of political dissension and revolt against high taxation, once more the people were divided. Now the two groups became a northern and southern kingdom, Israel and Judah. In both kingdoms, prosperity brought luxury, and with it, a falling away from the ancient worship of Yahweh. Many adopted the licentious practices of the Canaanitish religion, and worshiped the Canaanitish gods, their covenant with Yahweh forgotten. An increase in the commercial spirit brought with it exploitation, extortion, the selling of the poor into slavery for debts, immorality, and wars. Rising to the need of the times came a succession of great leaders. They have been called prophets, but perhaps it would be more accurate to call them sociologists, and religious truth-tellers? Well, there can be a variance. With a lot of exception, it's hard to tell sometimes when you look in ancient sources what are the real prophets? Who were the real prophets of God? And did they turn this person into a sociologist sort of figure or a philosopher sort of figure? Or did they turn was a figure like that turned into somebody that they considered, that they treated like a prophet? Well, we'll see as I continue this soon enough.